May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. When I started in the garden this year, one of the things that was pointed out to me was that we have very nice soil in the Grow to Give garden. Both the raised beds and the natural soil in the ground were full of organic matter, and they held on to the water well. One of the beds, however, was a little bit short on soil. The last bed, closest to the pond, a newly constructed raised bed. So we decided to bring in some more soil. We bought a mixture of soil and compost and brought it into the bed in a pickup truck. The new soil seemed dark and rich, and I was excited for what it would grow. But as the growing season has gone on and the plants flourished in the other 6 beds, everything that has been planted in the last bed has died. Onion starts planted at the beginning of the season have dropped one by one. All of the baby peppers that I started inside in March have failed to thrive as well. Even one pepper that we bought as a seedling, a hardy stock from a garden center, has also withered away. I asked one of our gardeners to go and test the soil, and he said that it just seemed to be too heavy in the compost, too many nutrients poisoning the plants. And so we more or less decided not to sow anything more in that bed for the season. This is what gardeners or farmers usually do. If the soil is bad, they don't plant anything there, at least until the soil can be improved or amended. They don't plant on rocky soil, and they don't plant in weedy patches of ground, at least not without first pulling up the weeds. And they certainly do not plant on the path. Farmers are careful with their seeds. They don't waste them on soil that they know is bad. They don't sprinkle them on hard, packed earth beaten down by regular foot traffic. And they don't plant them among the thorns and weeds, which are better adapted to the soil and will choke out the harvest. And so the sower in this parable is unlike any human farmer. This parable of the sower comes in a chapter of the Gospel of Matthew that is one parable after another. Jesus tells the gathered crowd what the kingdom of heaven is like, using what seems to be an increasingly strange language. We'll hear many of these parables over the next couple of weeks. The mustard seed, the yeast, the hidden treasure, the pearl of great price, the good fish, and the dragnet. The parables show us how the kingdom of heaven is not like the world we know. We are familiar with good soil and bad soil, with fertile and infertile ground, but we are unfamiliar with the profligate nature of this sower. We live in a world in which people try to be prudent, and in which abundance is carefully measured and rationed out for the best possible growth. But God's invitation gives us a glimpse into a different type of economy, one where the opportunity for growth is equally given out. I take a few things away from this parable myself. First, if you are like me, you are probably sitting here wondering, am I good soil or bad soil? And this parable tells us that the way that we know is by the fruits of the harvest. 100-fold, 60-fold, or 30-fold. Those of us who garden also know, however, that creating really good soil takes some work. It requires tilling up to break up the hard lumps where roots cannot penetrate. It requires weeding to root out competing plants or competing values. And it requires enrichment, fertilizing the seeds with nutrients or spiritual or intellectual development. How are you breaking up the clumps in your life, I wonder? How are you weeding out what you know is not good? And how are you feeding the good things in your life? Alongside this, we can also take away that God's invitation into relationship, invitation to receive the gospel into our lives, the seed of the sower is ever present. It is prodigally given, even when we are not ready for it. And we are constantly being invited into a more just reality. We are constantly being invited to follow Jesus' example of generosity, and we are constantly being invited to stand with those at the margin. Even if we'd never done any of this before, the sower is always sowing, throwing seeds on even the driest, most hard-packed earth. And finally, despite all our tilling and weeding and fertilizing, I take away the fact that we may not actually be very good at predicting where the seeds will grow best. The rich soil and the compost that we brought into the garden this year ended up killing the plants rather than feeding them. On the other hand, we never know when a seed will grow up in someplace totally unexpected. I'm sure you've encountered life sprouting up in the most unexpected of places. A blade of grass that emerges from the sidewalk. A tree that has somehow taken root in the crevice of a cement wall. Many of the seeds that fall on the path will become food for the birds, but a few may take root and become something beautiful. Without the prodigal sower throwing seed every which way, we would never know that rich soil was hidden away in some crack. Amen. Ascribe to the Lord the honor due God's name, bring offerings, and come into his courts with praise.